Do you want to tune into the Stanley Cup Finals, but you don't know anything about either team and you're just a casual hockey fan? Well, this is the podcast for you because I had on NHL Analyst Jonny Lazarus to speak about everything that you need to know going into this year's Stanley Cup Finals during this episode of Iggy Sports Talk. Welcome back into Iggy Sports Talk. I'm your host, Jake Nazuski, or Iggy for short, and I want to thank you so much for tuning into this episode. And we are in the exciting time of sports. We got the NBA Finals, we got the NHL Stanley Cup Finals, we got MLB, we got soccer, we got the Olympics coming up soon. But in this episode, I'm going to be speaking about the Stanley Cup Finals, and I'm going to be honest with you. I'm a casual hockey fan. I'm one of those people who will watch hockey when it's the playoffs. And for the rest of the time during the NHL season, I'll kind of just tune it out. And if you're one of those people, this is the podcast for you. And I've tried to sort of give those types of casual fans an episode just like this, where if you don't know anything about either the Panthers or the Oilers, who are both playing and competing in the Stanley Cup Final this year, then I wanted to be able to give you an episode so then you could learn everything you need to know so you could tune in and enjoy this year's Stanley Cup Finals. And I brought on the perfect guest to give you all this info. His name is Jonny Lazarus, and he is an analyst for NHL, content creator for BR Open Ice, as well as the host of the Blue Crew podcast. And he's also a college broadcaster for College Hockey East. And in this episode, him and I speak about everything that you need to know about this year's Stanley Cup Final, the X factors on the Panthers and the Oilers, as well as we dive into the NHL Draft, which is just a few weeks away and is going to be taking place at the Las Vegas Sphere. And then we wrap it up all with Jonny giving you his advice on how he's been able to become a hockey content creator, and sort of gives you insight on how you would be able to do the same and become a content creator in your favorite sport. So without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Jonny. So how are we doing today, Jonny? It's, a few days ahead of the Stanley Cup Finals, Oilers against the Panthers. And, just to start off, I just want to be upfront. I'm kind of doing this for the casual sports fans. For me, I'm a big baseball, football guy, gotten more into hockey over the last few years or so, but I thought you would be the perfect person to sort of bridge the gap between, hardcore hockey fans and casual hockey fans for people who really want to tune into the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if you are a casual hockey fan right now, this is the perfect final for you to tune into. You got a really exciting team in Florida that plays physical, that has a ton of swagger, and then you got the best player in the world and a Canadian team and a Canadian market in Connor McDavid. So it's going to be a pretty awesome final. I'm stoked for it. I think you have two teams that are, I don't want to say total opposites, but, one very strong offense against one very strong defense. And I think with that, it's going to be a really good bash. So I'm fired up for it. And casuals should be pretty fired up too.
And for those casuals who are tuning in, just a little bit of some insight. The Panthers were in the Stanley Cup back last year, so they've been at the last 2 years. And then the Oilers, they're in their first Stanley Cup since 2006. And if they win it, it could be the first time a Canadian team has won the Stanley Cup since 1993. And so I'm curious, from your vantage point, how do you think that experience for the Florida Panthers being in it last season will help them this year?
Yeah, I mean, experience always helps. It also could potentially put more pressure on them, if that makes sense. Sometimes the emotions of knowing exactly where you are sometimes might creep in, but the Panthers are, I'm not doubting them emotionally, but also with that, the Oilers have that magnitude too of, being Canada's team, even though they don't see it that way. But again, I mentioned the swagger that Florida has, even when they were down in the playoffs, they never looked nervous or worried. They're a pretty cool, calm, collected, and composed bunch. And I think obviously last year's experience will certainly pay off, but it's a whole different animal come Stanley Cup Final. There's a lot of sayings out there that there are 4 seasons within a season. There's the preseason, the regular season, the first 3 rounds of the playoffs, and then the Stanley Cup Final. It's just the way that things ramp up. So, yeah, Florida, more experienced team for sure. Doesn't mean that they have the edge, though.
Yeah, and you kind of heard it from the Oilers head coach yesterday, sort of saying, if you ask the Buffalo Bills how experienced that helped them, obviously losing, 4 Super Bowls in a row. But you also look at, you mentioned Connor McDavid. There's some big names, Matthew Tkachuk. And when you really look at the Panthers side, from what I've read, they're a really balanced roster from top to bottom. But in terms of them comparing to the Oilers, they don't really have those high-end players kind of like the Oilers are able to have. So, everybody, who knows hockey or is just a sports fan, has heard of Connor McDavid and Matthew Tkachuk. Is there any other players that people should look out for if they're tuning into this Stanley Cup and don't really know much about these teams?
I mean, there's a whole list. There are guys like Leon Draisaitl, obviously, who any given day could be, the best player on a team. And I think he's a top 10 forward in the NHL, and that's probably without a doubt. Then on Florida side, Alexander Barkov. Barkov to me is one of those guys who could be the Conn Smythe winner as the Stanley Cup playoff MVP. I mean, he's, like a great 200-foot two-way forward. And I made the comparison today, and I didn't mean any disrespect to Barkov offensively, but he could be that Andre Iguodala 2015 Finals MVP. He's out there, can produce offense, but also shuts down the Connor McDavid, LeBron James. So that's a guy to look for there, and trying to tie it all in for the casual fans, the NBA fans. Barkov is a guy who, the point production is there. He's got 17 points in 17 games, 6 goals, 11 assists, and he's got all the skill in the world. It might not be as flashy or as sexy, but he is like the complete package of a hockey player. And when you watch him closely, it's something that you learn, or not learn, but you just appreciate more. So Barkov, I'd say Draisaitl, and then guys like Reinhart who can score, Verhaeghe who can score, Zach Hyman who can score, Evan Bouchard on defense for Edmonton, puts up a lot of points. There's so many players on both sides here that are incredibly dynamic. And then you have the aggressors like Sam Bennett in Florida, and again, Tkachuk can also do that stuff too. So there's so many different things to look for here.
Yeah, and I think the biggest storyline thus far is the distance between the two respective cities. When you really look at it, 4,089 kilometers is the longest between the cities in NHL Stanley Cup history. And when looking at it, 7 hours 35 minutes for a flight. It's 44 days if you were to walk that, and 44 hours if you were to drive. So curious on your thoughts on how the distance could maybe impact these teams' play game in and game out.
Well, listen, neither team has the advantage. So, when you talk about the distance, it's not like there's one team flying further than the other, right? So, and even with the rest going into the final, both teams closed out their series, on home ice in game 6. So it's a pretty even, I guess, for outside factors, it's pretty even. And having 2 days of rest, I think, in between some games helps too, just because the travel is so significant. But I don't see that playing a huge factor, I guess, in the on ice product. But again, it's something that both teams have to just deal with.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about obviously crampage, also the media side too. I'm just thinking about feeling bad, not so much for the reporters, but having to go that distance. And when you also look at some of the layover flights, when you really look into it, it really adds up in terms of the time. But from what you're seeing, both teams are obviously in the Stanley Cup for a reason. But could you see this series potentially go 5, 6, 7 games?
I think it's going 7. I do. And I think it's going to take so many turns. There's going to be, we're going to talk one day, are the Oilers done? Right? The Panthers will look, they're going to look in control at some point, and then you'll question what Edmonton has in the tank, and Edmonton will then come back. It was kind of the same thing that happened with the Dallas Edmonton series. Dallas plays a very similar style to Florida, just on the West Coast. And, there were a lot of times where we didn't count or give Edmonton a chance, and they proved it wrong every time. The Oilers are down 2-0 to start game 4, down 2-1 in the series, and you're kind of writing them off this team's they're finished. And then they rally off 4 straight goals and win the game, So there's going to be a lot of that. There's going to be, I guess, a lot of just drama away from it. But I think this one's going 7. I don't know how it's going to get there, but I really do think it's going the distance.
And then if you were able to have a Stanley Cup pick, on this day, 3 or 4 days ahead of the series starting, who would you pick?
Yeah, I bet against the Panthers like all year, honestly. I had them missing the playoffs. I had Tampa winning the first round. I had Florida winning against Boston, but then I had the Rangers winning last round. And they've proved me wrong every time, but I'm still just going to go back and do it. So I'll bet against Florida again, and I'll take Edmonton in 7. That was the pick I went with. And, I'm not like rooting against Florida. I don't hate Florida by any means, but, it's pretty tough not to root for the best player in the world to go get one when he has a chance.
And you brought up the Tampa Bay Lightning. It's pretty crazy looking at the last 5 seasons a Florida team has been in the Stanley Cup. So do you think that Florida is the state of hockey?
I mean, no, but it's but there's something to be said about it, right? It's a attractive destination for free agents and players that want to be traded. I mean, I don't really know what else to say about that. It's just, it's great. Who wouldn't want to play hockey down in South Florida? And for the fans, it's great too. You get to tailgate, hang out outside, go into the rink, and then enjoy the game. And there's a certainly a new culture of hockey down in Florida, that's for sure. And the '96 Stanley Cup Final team that went there against Colorado and lost. I know a lot of kids my age. I'm a '96 birth year that ended up playing hockey because of that team. There's guys like Chase Prisky, Brandon Duhaime, Shane Gostisbehere, all these guys that grew up coming out of Florida because of what that team did. And now, maybe you'll look 20 years from now and see a lot of other kids come out of Florida. I think even prospects now like Jacob Fowler's from Florida, Seamus Casey's from Florida. Those are 2 guys that are really good college players right now. So, Florida is becoming a hockey state. I don't know if the state of hockey is appropriate though.
Yeah, I just saw that phrase being thrown around like after the Panthers ended up advancing, and I agree. I had never really thought of it as that, but I had to get your thoughts on it because you don't really see one state really dominating the championship in any of the other 3 major sports. So it's kind of interesting to see how everything in this series kind of plays out and how much media coverage with these different big names being in it and how much that really amplifies how the excitement around the series. But you brought up some of the college players, so we can start to get into a little bit of the NHL draft because there's not too much layoff for NHL fans or hockey fans from the Stanley Cup finishing to the draft on June 28th to the 29th. But it's going to be at the Sphere in Las Vegas. I'm really excited to see how that whole setup is. But what's your thoughts going into the NHL draft and how everything, just like the setup and the excitement, could look at the Sphere?
Yeah, I mean, with specific players, I haven't done a deep dive into prospects and who's going to go where and whatnot outside of Macklin Celebrini, obviously, just because there's so much going on during the year. You kind of want to focus on one thing at a time. But as far as the spectacle goes, I do think this is the last time where front office and management will actually be on site at the draft. I do believe the NHL is going to start going into more of an NFL draft model where the teams are kind of in their own facility surrounded, I guess, or calling in and whatnot. So there will be like a last hurrah feeling to it, I think, as well. I don't think I'll be there, so still trying to figure out my draft plans. But the Sphere, I haven't been yet. I've seen it from the outside. I mean, it looks unbelievable. I have no idea what they have planned, so it's hard for me to, give a clear-cut response to what it'll look like. But I imagine it's going to be something that we haven't seen before, and with that, it'll be unique, interesting, and super cool. So I'm fired up to see what they do. The Sharks obviously have the first pick. I imagine there'll be swimming sharks around in the Sphere. Maybe that's obviously like an aquarium vibe or something like that. But yeah, it'll be very cool. I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, me too. And I feel like the NHL draft is semi-similar to MLB in that, there isn't tons of excitement ahead.
I've never seen one clip, one video, 1 second of an MLB draft. I have no idea how it works or what it looks like.
Well, I think it kind of hurts that, both, leagues, it takes a little bit for those players to get to the top. Obviously, Connor Bedard went right from, high school over to the NHL, but the MLB, you got to go through the minors, and then obviously NBA and NFL, you just go right to the league. But I think, for myself, I'm going to be obviously tuning into the NHL draft just for the upcoming prospects, but also just like what it'll look like at the Sphere and how that all kind of plays out. But, you brought up Macklin Celebrini, and, I think in a lot of people's minds that he could be the first overall pick to the San Jose Sharks. And
I mean, he will be. If he's not, it's like the biggest surprise ever.
Well, so you got to watch him a little bit at Boston University, and for people who don't know, Jonny was doing some color analysts for Hockey East. And so, what was really your thoughts on Celebrini during his year at Boston University?
So I called, I think, 2 BU games, but one that really sticks out. It was BU at UMass. UMass had the lead. Celebrini scored 2 goals in the third, and BU ended up winning the game, coming back in that game. And, he's a 17-year-old kid. It's insane the impact he had on a game at such a young age. I mean, even being younger than a true freshman, I have an appreciation for it because I went into college as a 20-year-old freshman, so like the development that he already has at that age is just, the ceiling is so high, and Jay Pandolfo, the Boston University head coach, has compared him to Crosby and Jonathan Taves and all these guys, the similar playing style. And anytime you hear that, obviously it's, this kid's special. But also what's cool too is that he grew up around professional sports. I believe his dad is a team doctor for the Golden State Warriors. Not exactly sure what the title is of his father, but, I've heard quotes about him from Draymond Green and all these different athletes that have been around him. And that's something that will help him not only just with the physical side of playing in the NHL, but the mental side. It's tough mentally just in every aspect of the game, but being around it and growing up in it, I think maybe he's more accustomed to it. So that's another just edge that he has. And everything Macklin Celebrini did this year, it was just so much fun to watch. And every big moment, he didn't shy away. He stepped up. And I know BU didn't win the national championship, but he did everything in his power to get them as close as he could.
Yeah, and I think that mental side is key, especially, when you look at just being around that environment and the pressure that obviously he's going to have. And, we hear a lot of people, kind of comparing him to being the next Connor Bedard with his skill paired with his age. And curious if you would agree with that same sentiment.
I don't know if Bedard, I mean, I actually think he might be like a better natural center than Bedard. But I think Bedard is a way more dangerous goal scorer. I don't know if they're necessarily so comparable. They're a little bit different. But, I'd give maybe the playmaking edge to Celebrini and the goal scoring touch to Bedard. But, like, they both have, it's I don't know. It's tough because I haven't seen Macklin play in the NHL yet, and I never saw Connor Bedard play in college. So it's tough to really compare. But, size and strength, yeah, that's comparable for sure.
That makes sense. And, I'm really excited to see how everything obviously plays out in Vegas in a few weeks and to, get a little bit of a glimpse of these next rising stars coming into the NHL. But wanted to move on in terms of, more of what you do because you're all over the place in the hockey world. And it's really cool to see what you've been able to accomplish over the last few years. An analyst for NHL, content creator for BR Open Ice. I brought up the broadcasting aspect. You also do a few podcasts, one on the Rangers. And I'm curious for people who want to get into being a content creator for their favorite sport. For me, it's baseball. And I'm curious, what advice would you give to those people who want to do kind of what you're doing, but maybe in their favorite sport?
Yeah, I mean, listen, if you have, I think, if you have a computer and you have $400 to go buy a good microphone, anyone could do it, right? For me, like, I loved talking hockey, and a lot of my teammates always told me that like I had the personality for it, and I just wanted to learn how to edit, make videos, do all these kinds of things, and I never, if I'm being honest, I never thought that I would actually do this. Like it was in my wildest dreams to have this be a full-time job, and even when I was working full-time, I was just doing the stuff on the side. And in 2020, when I really started, I wasn't getting like a response. I wasn't getting listeners. I had like 30 listeners to my episodes of my podcast, and probably 10 of them were my high school friend group, So I think with consistency and with time and just the eagerness to learn anyone could be doing it, and but also I think there's a part of it too of just being genuine. And for me, like, I was kind of like, not like the class clown, but I was never afraid to embarrass myself. And I don't get on the microphone and try to sound smarter, like I know more than anyone else. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and I own it. I think sometimes, and that wasn't how I was at the start. I wanted to sound smarter than maybe I actually am at times. But I think there's sometimes a lot of pressure that if you do want to do this, you feel like you have to be good at it right away, and you're not going to be. Like I listen back to my earlier days doing media, and I was like, oh my God, like I sucked, but that's just with anything, like whether you play a sport, whether you're studying for a test, like the more reps you get, the more practice you do, you're going to get better. And the gratification might not always be there right away, and then one day, 3 years later, suddenly people are listening, people are tuning in, just because if you show up enough and your face is seen enough, sometimes maybe just all it takes is one person to click on it, and it's funny. I've had a lot of kids reach out to me, and I give this example. This one kid, Ben Wasserman, actually, I don't even know if he knows that I tell this story, but he's a senior or just graduated at Penn State. He reached out to me like 2 years ago, and he was like, "Hey Jonny, like big fan of your work. Like would love to talk to you. I'm a content creator myself." And I was like, "Dude, I've seen your stuff. Like I've seen it." And just because he posts like every day, but he doesn't know that I see it, and how would he? So that's something that's just like so real, is that you never know who's seeing your stuff, and that's the world we live in. You can kind of anyone, like I said, anyone do it. And that's I guess that's the main takeaway.
Yeah. And when we first spoke, I told you recently that you inspired me to start getting more consistently into posting baseball content. And I even said to myself, I'm like, you want to be a baseball content creator, why aren't you posting? And I think that's the key, is just like not trying to make it perfect right off the bat. And I was laughing a little bit when you brought up looking at your old stuff, because I did the same thing. Terrible. But it's a great reflection on the hard work that you've put in, and it's a great way to kind of give yourself the pat on the back of like, I'm proud of how far I came. But it takes time to gain your voice, gain sort of your niche as well. But people hear that you do stuff with BR Open Ice or NHL, and they think, well, if I'm going to be recording stuff, how am I able to get in front of those people, or at least be able to get those types of opportunities? So curious from how you were able to do it, what advice would you give to those people in terms of, if you're consistently putting out content, how do you try to make it to where like those companies or those leagues get their attention?
Well, the best advice I got was, like, if you want to work for a company, essentially just pretend that you already do, right? Like, if you want to do a podcast on The Ringer, on Barstool Sports, for Bleacher Report, like kind of look at what they do and just implement it on your own. Because anytime you do apply for a job, they're not going to ask, hey, what can you do for us if we hire you? It's what have you already done, and they want to see your experience. They want to see your work. And that's why, I don't want to say got like lucky, but I was just kind of using my own personality mixed in with the content that I liked taking in, and I kind of catered it to what I like listening to. How can I make my voice sound like that? And that's something that I also think takes time. You have to kind of learn to find your own voice, if that makes sense. But within that, you have to look at what you like, what you fit, what fits you, and just go down that avenue. Because you can't be Stephen A. Smith and Paul Bissonnette and Kevin Bieksa and Elliot Friedman all at once. You can't. So you got to just kind of pick your lane and what fits you best and kind of go down that lane. And that's the beauty of it, is that like that there are so many people that just coexist, but all have their own unique sound. And if you try to be someone else, then you're not going to get anywhere, because there already is that person. So if you can kind of take everything you like and make it into your own voice, I think that's the way to go.
I think when you find your own voice, it comes off more authentically. I remember when I first started trying to get into broadcasting, Don Orsillo, as a Red Sox fan, was the guy that I looked up to. And I tried to emulate his voice, emulate his mannerisms. And, you find that voice and, how you are authentically able to show up on camera through those reps. But one last thing for you, you know, looking back on your journey, one of my favorite questions is like, what advice would you give to your younger self? But I'm going to switch it up a little bit. If you could do it all over again, what would you do differently?
Oh, so many things. But I'm like an everything happens for a reason kind of guy. So I'm happy I did what I did to get here. But I mean, what are we talking about? Just like in life? Like, what are we talking about here?
I mean more about just like, you know, your career, trying to become a content creator, you know, getting these different big opportunities.
Yeah.
But if you want to go the life route, you can too.
No. I think if I could tell my younger self just one thing, it's just not to act emotionally. You know, it's something my dad always preached to, like just to kind of sleep on everything. You know, if there's something bothering you, if there's something you're excited about, don't get too excited, don't get too low. You know, just take it and, you know, kind of take your time with things. And before you, like, if you're making a big job decision, you know, anything like that, just kind of let it sit, you know. There were a couple of decisions I made when I was younger, transferring schools and whatnot, and jobs and all that stuff, that I was like, in that moment, I was like, I'm unhappy or I need this job. Like, and I just did it because I just felt like right then and there, I was like, I needed an answer, you know. It was that, I think that's the hardest thing in life, is just kind of that unknown, and feeling stuck. So there was things I would just do to kind of feel unstuck. I don't know if that's a word, but you know what I mean? So I would say the advice is just to not act emotionally.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. And, you know, I think when you do feel stuck or you have that unknown, it's kind of like what you said, like already acting like your life is how you want it to be. And like, if you have a goal for a specific job that you want, like already try and act like you have that job. Like, you know, I currently work for DraftKings and I interviewed with them like 6 months before I didn't get the job. Emotionally, I was really upset about it.
I didn't get a DraftKings job. I got denied.
Yeah, I ended up getting it like 6 months later. And so you never know how things are going to work out. Exactly like you said. Completely agree. Everything.
But even a little thing, something I do a lot, like if I get like a troll or like chirped on Twitter, like I'll type out a response and I'll just click delete, just because like I get it out, but I don't like post it. Just like I get the emotion out and it feels good to just respond. And then I'm just like, I'm not putting this out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like little things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, man. But really appreciate you coming on, taking the time. You know, excited for people who aren't hockey fans to hear this and get excited for the NHL Finals, and also learn a little bit more about yourself and your journey.
Thank you, Iggy. I appreciate it, bro.
I hope that you did enjoy my conversation with Jonny, and that you feel like you know more about this year's Stanley Cup Finals now than before you tuned into this episode. That was honestly exactly why I wanted to do this, because not only for myself as a casual hockey fan, but also for those other casual hockey fans who haven't really tuned in to this year's NHL season and want to get in on the action of this great Stanley Cup matchup between the Panthers and the Oilers. But I want to hear from you. If you're watching on YouTube, comment down below who you're rooting for this year's Stanley Cup Final. Or if you're listening on the audio version, make sure to go over to Instagram at Iggy Sports Talk and let me know who you are rooting for. But also make sure to subscribe on YouTube or whatever audio platform that you're listening to so you don't miss out on episodes each and every single week. I not only speak about sports topics just like this, but I also showcase different stories looking at the deeper aspects of sports and life. But I really appreciate you tuning in, and I hope that you have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you and talk to you next time. Peace.